The grocery store was nearly empty that Thursday afternoon. I remember because the fluorescent lights made everything feel too bright, too exposed. My cart was full. Nothing extravagant, just the usual items: milk, bread, some chicken for dinner. When the cashier rang up my total and I swiped my card, I expected that familiar beep of approval. Instead, the machine blinked red. Declined. I laughed it off. Must be a glitch. The cashier, a young woman with tired eyes, tried it again. Same result. She looked at me with that particular brand of pity reserved for people whose cards don't work, and I felt my face go hot. Behind me, a line was forming. I could feel their impatience like a physical weight pressing against my back. The woman directly behind me shifted her weight from foot to foot, her keys jangling. Someone further back sighed loudly. I fumbled in my purse for another card, my fingers clumsy, catching on old receipts and loose change. My hands were trembling so badly I could barely grip the second card when I finally found it. "Take your time," the cashier said, but her tone suggested the opposite. She was already glancing past me at the growing line, calculating how far behind schedule this was putting her. I swiped the second card. Declined. A third. Declined. I'll never forget the metallic taste that flooded my mouth in that moment. It wasn't embarrassment. Not yet. It was the first whisper of something darker, something that would unravel everything I thought I knew about my life. I mumbled an apology, left my groceries at the register, and walked out into the harsh Los Angeles sunlight with my hands shaking. The parking lot shimmered with heat. I sat in my car with the door open, my feet still on the pavement, and tried to breathe. The steering wheel felt sticky under my palms. Somewhere nearby, a car alarm was going off, the shrill sound drilling into my skull. I stared at my wallet, at the stack of cards that should have worked, that had always worked, and felt the first crack appear in my reality. 3 months earlier, I'd been sitting in my garden in Pasadena, drinking coffee and watching hummingbirds dart between the jasmine flowers. My son Marcus had just given me the most generous birthday gift, $2,000 in cash, presented in a crisp envelope with a card that read, "For the woman who gave me everything." I'd cried. Actual tears of joy. Here was proof that I'd raised him right, that despite the struggles and the sacrifices, he'd grown into a man who valued his mother. That morning had been perfect. The kind of perfect that you want to freeze and keep forever. The sky was that particular shade of blue you only get in Southern California, clean and endless. The air smelled like jasmine and fresh-cut grass from the neighbor's yard. Marcus had arrived early, before Robert was even awake, and we'd sat on the patio drinking coffee, just the two of us. "Open it," he'd said, sliding the envelope across the wrought iron table. My hands had trembled then too, but from happiness. The card was expensive, thick paper with embossed flowers. Inside, his handwriting, which had always been terrible, a doctor's scrawl, was surprisingly neat. He'd taken his time with it. That touched me almost as much as the money. When I'd opened the envelope and seen the bills, crisp hundreds still bound with a bank wrapper, I'd gasped. "Marcus, this is too much. It's not nearly enough." He'd reached across the table and squeezed my hand. His eyes were wet. "You've given me everything, Mom. Everything I am is because of you." We'd both cried then, sitting in my garden while the hummingbirds performed their aerial ballet and the morning sun painted everything gold. It had felt like redemption. All those years of struggle, of sacrificing, of going without, they'd meant something. I'd raised a good man. The money felt like validation. After years of penny pinching, of choosing between fixing the car or buying new shoes, of making every dollar stretch until it screamed, finally, a cushion, a safety net. I deposited it immediately, feeling for the first time in years like maybe I could breathe a little easier. I remember standing at the bank, filling out the deposit slip with hands that still trembled slightly. The teller had been friendly, a young man with carefully styled hair who'd commented on what a nice son I must have. "Not everyone gets birthday presents like that," he'd said, smiling as he processed the transaction. "I'm very lucky," I'd told him, and I'd believed it. My husband Robert had hugged me that day, his arms tight around my shoulders. We'd been married for 34 years. He'd lost his construction job 2 years prior, and I'd been carrying us financially ever since on my modest income from the community college where I worked in administration. I thought we were in it together. I thought when you loved someone for 3 decades, you knew them down to their bones. Robert had been in an unusually good mood that week. I'd noticed it, but hadn't questioned it. He'd been whistling while doing dishes, something he hadn't done in months. He'd suggested we go out to dinner, to a nice place we couldn't really afford. "We should celebrate," he'd said. "You deserve it." We'd gone to this little Italian place in Old Town, the kind with checkered tablecloths and candles in wine bottles. Robert had ordered expensive wine, the kind we used to drink before money got tight. He'd toasted to me, to our future, to better days ahead. His face in the candlelight had looked younger, less worn. I'd fallen in love with him all over again that night. I was wrong about a lot of things. Looking back now, I can see the signs I missed. The way Marcus avoided eye contact when he handed me that envelope. How Robert had been unusually cheerful that week, almost manic. The stack of mail he'd suddenly started collecting from the mailbox before I could get to it. But when you trust someone, when you've built your entire existence around the belief that your family has your back, you don't go looking for betrayals. You smooth over the rough edges, you explain away the inconsistencies. There was the time I'd found Robert on his laptop at 2 a.m, the screen glowing blue in the darkness of our bedroom. He'd closed it quickly when I'd stirred, mumbled something about not being able to sleep, about looking at job listings. I'd believed him because the alternative, that he was lying, that he was hiding something, was unthinkable. Or the afternoon Marcus had come by to borrow my checkbook because he'd forgotten his at home and needed to pay a contractor. He'd returned it the next day, everything seemingly in order. I hadn't thought to check the register. Why would I? He was my son, even the new television. Marcus had said he'd gotten it on sale, some Black Friday deal. It was a beautiful thing, enormous, with a picture so clear it was almost too real. "You guys deserve this," he'd said while setting it up. Robert had been like a kid on Christmas morning, learning all the features, scrolling through channels. I'd stood in the doorway watching them bond over this gift and felt warm all over. My boys, taking care of each other, taking care of me. I'd been so fucking blind. That night after the grocery store incident, I called the bank from my car. My hands were still trembling as I navigated their automated system, and when the representative finally came on the line, her voice was professionally sympathetic in a way that made my stomach drop. "Ma'am, I'm showing a balance of $147 in your checking account." The number hit me like a physical blow. I'd had $8,000 in that account 2 weeks ago. I checked it obsessively because money had always been tight. And knowing exactly what I had gave me some sense of control in a life that often felt like it was happening to me rather than because of me. "That's impossible," I said. My voice sounded strange, disconnected from my body. "Check again." She did. The balance didn't change. What did change was my understanding of reality. She walked me through recent transactions, large withdrawals, transfers I'd never authorized. My name was on them, my signature, but I hadn't made them. "These withdrawals," I said, my voice sounding hollow even to my own ears. "Where were they made?" "Let me see. 2 at a Bank of America branch in Glendale, 1 ATM withdrawal in downtown LA, and several online transfers to an account at Wells Fargo." "I don't have an account at Wells Fargo." But there was a pause. I could hear her typing. "Ma'am, the account is in your name. It was opened 6 months ago." The parking lot was emptying around me. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink that seemed obscenely beautiful, given what I was learning. A family walked past my car, the kids arguing about what to have for dinner, the parents looking tired but content. Normal people with normal problems. Can you tell me the other transactions? Everything from the past 3 months. She read them off. Each one felt like a fresh wound. Withdrawals I'd never made, purchases at stores I'd never visited, restaurants where I'd never eaten. Someone had been living a whole separate life with my money, and I was only just now finding out about it. When I walked into our house that evening, Robert was in his recliner watching a game show. The television was new. I'd noticed it last week, but hadn't questioned it because Marcus had said he'd gotten it on sale. The sound of canned laughter filled our living room, and I stood there in the doorway watching my husband of 34 years, and I didn't recognize him. The house looked the same. The painting of the California coast we'd bought on our honeymoon still hung above the couch. Robert's reading glasses were on the side table where he always left them. The throw pillows I'd made last Christmas were arranged just so. Everything was familiar, and everything was wrong. "The bank called," I said. My voice was calm, too calm. He didn't look at me. "Yeah? We're broke." That got his attention. He muted the TV and turned to face me, and I saw it then, that flicker of something in his eyes. Not surprise, guilt. "What are you talking about?" But his voice lacked conviction. He was stalling, trying to figure out what I knew, how much I'd discovered. "Our checking account has $147 in it. 2 weeks ago it had $8,000. Where did the money go, Robert?" He stood up slowly, his hand reaching out toward me in a placating gesture I'd seen 1,000 times. "Carol, let's not do this now. You're upset." "Don't." I stepped back, away from his reach. "Don't you dare tell me I'm upset. Where is the money?" Have you ever doubted your own sanity? Have you ever looked at someone you love and felt the ground shift beneath your feet? That's where I was standing. In my own living room, in the house we'd bought together when Marcus was 5 years old, and I was looking at a stranger. Robert's face cycled through expressions: confusion, anger, fear, resignation. Finally, he sank back into the recliner. "It's complicated. Then uncomplicated. I needed some cash. For expenses." Expenses? The word tasted bitter. $7,000 in expenses? In 2 weeks? He wouldn't meet my eyes. I was going to pay it back. "With what money? You don't have a job, Robert. You haven't had a job in 2 years. That stung him. I saw it in the way his jaw tightened, the way his hands clenched on the armrests of the chair. Good. I wanted it to sting. "I've been trying," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "Do you think it's easy for me? Watching you work yourself to death while I sit here? So you stole from me? That's your solution?" "I didn't steal. It's our money. Joint accounts, remember?" The next morning, I started making calls. First to Marcus, who didn't answer, then to our bank again, demanding to see copies of the withdrawal slips. They sent them over, and there it was, my signature, but not quite right. The loops were too tight, the slant was wrong. Someone had practiced, but not quite enough. I sat at the kitchen table with the bank statements spread out in front of me, trying to piece together the timeline. My coffee had gone cold hours ago, but I kept holding the mug anyway, needing something solid to anchor me. The signatures were good. I had to give them that. If I hadn't been looking for it, if I hadn't known my own handwriting intimately from years of signing forms and checks and birthday cards, I might have missed it. But there were tells. The way the C in Carol didn't quite loop the same way. The L at the end that was too sharp, too angular. I took out my phone and photographed everything, every statement, every withdrawal slip, every suspicious transaction. My hands were surprisingly steady. I felt cold, clinical, like I was documenting evidence for someone else's case. Marcus called back around noon. I was still at the kitchen table, surrounded by papers. "Hey, Mom. Sorry, I missed your call. What's up?" His voice was so casual, so unconcerned. For a moment, I wanted to pretend everything was fine, to say I'd just been calling to chat, to ask about his day, to be the kind of mother I'd always tried to be. "I need you to come over," I said instead. "Right now." "I'm at work, Mom. Can it wait?" No, it can't wait. Something in my tone must have warned him. Is everything okay? No, Marcus, everything is not okay. He arrived 40 minutes later. I watched from the window as he parked, as he sat in his car for a moment collecting himself before getting out. He knew. Whatever act he was about to put on, he knew. Robert came clean 3 days later. Not because he wanted to, but because I'd locked myself in our bedroom with all the bank statements I could find, and I wasn't coming out until I had answers. He stood outside the door, and through that thin piece of wood, he told me everything. He'd been gambling, online poker, sports betting, casino trips to Vegas that he'd claimed were job interviews. He'd burned through his retirement, then started on mine. When that ran out, he'd forged my signature on loan applications, credit cards, withdrawal slips. Marcus had known, had helped even, covering for his father when I started asking questions about missing mail. How long? I asked through the door. My back was pressed against it, my knees drawn up to my chest. I felt like a child hiding from monsters. Except the monsters were on both sides of the door. Carol, please open the door. How long? A long pause. 2 years, maybe longer. 2 years, 24 months of lies, of waking up next to him every morning, of making him coffee, of asking about his day. 2 years of being married to a stranger. And Marcus? Another pause. He found out about 6 months ago. Saw some paperwork I'd left out. I asked him not to tell you. You asked him not to tell me. I laughed, but it came out wrong, harsh and broken. And the birthday gift? The $2,000? That was my idea. You'd been asking questions, looking at the accounts more carefully. I thought if we gave you some of your own money back, made it seem like we were doing well enough to be generous, you'd stop looking. The $2,000 birthday gift? That was my own money, withdrawn and given back to me like some kind of sick loan, a magic trick. Look at this generous gesture while we pick your pockets clean. I thought blood ties meant we should always find a way to forgive. My mother had taught me that. She'd stayed with my father through his drinking, his affairs, his violent temper, because that's what wives did. That's what mothers did. You forgave. You held the family together even if it was killing you inch by inch. My mother had died at 63, worn down to nothing by a lifetime of forgiving. At her funeral, people had talked about how devoted she'd been, how she'd never complained, how she'd kept the family together. They'd made it sound noble. It had taken me 30 years to realize it was just sad. She'd come to me once, when I was pregnant with Marcus. My father was on one of his benders, and she'd shown up at my door with a suitcase and a black eye she tried to hide with makeup. "Can I stay here for a few days?" she'd asked, her voice small. "Of course. Mom, you should leave him, for good." She'd looked at me with such sadness. "He's your father, Carol. He's my husband. You don't just give up on family. Even when family is hurting you? Especially then. That's when they need you most." She'd gone back to him 3 days later, and she'd stayed until the liver failure took him, and then she'd stayed in that same house, alone, for another 2 years before her own body gave out. Sometimes I wondered if she'd died of a broken heart or of relief. For years, I'd swallowed that belief like bitter medicine. When Robert lost his job and spent his days on the couch instead of looking for work, I forgave. When Marcus dropped out of college and moved back home at 28, I forgave. When they made jokes about my cooking, my appearance, my opinions, I smiled and forgave because that's what good women did. But this wasn't a mistake. This was theft. This was betrayal, so calculated, so deliberate, that it had required planning, coordination, lies stacked upon lies until they formed a wall between me and reality. The worst part wasn't even the money. It was the gift. That envelope Marcus had handed me with such ceremony, with tears in his eyes, that I'd thought were gratitude, but must have been shame. Or maybe not. Maybe he felt nothing at all. I sacrificed my home. Not immediately, but the dominoes had already started falling by then, and I was too stunned to stop them. Robert had taken out a second mortgage I knew nothing about. When I discovered it, buried in the pile of hidden mail I finally unearthed from his closet, we were already 3 months behind on payments. The closet had been my next target after I'd gotten the truth about the gambling. I'd waited until Robert went to the store, or wherever he actually went when he said he was running errands, and I'd torn through every space in our house that might hide secrets. His closet had been the motherlode. Boxes and boxes of unopened mail stuffed behind his winter coats, credit card statements showing balances I couldn't fathom, collections notices, legal threats, and the mortgage paperwork, official and damning, showing he'd remortgaged our house that we'd almost paid off. That was supposed to be our security in retirement, and blown through that money too. I sat on the floor of that closet, surrounded by evidence of his betrayal, and I couldn't even cry. I was beyond tears. I was in some new territory of hurt that didn't have a name. The bank had been sending notices. Robert had been collecting them, stuffing them in a box with his golf magazines and old tax returns. Like if he didn't look at them, they'd cease to exist. I let them manage the finances. That was my first mistake, though I couldn't have known it at the time. When Robert lost his job, he'd seemed so defeated, so desperate to still be useful. Taking over the bills gave him purpose. Or so I told myself. Really, it gave him access, control, the ability to steal from me while I worked 50-hour weeks to keep us afloat. He'd been so convincing, too. "You work so hard, honey," he'd said. "Let me take this off your plate. I've got time now. It's the least I can do." I'd been grateful. That's what kills me. I'd been grateful that he was taking an interest, stepping up, being a partner. I'd thanked him for it. I came home one Tuesday to find the notice taped to our front door. Eviction. 30 days. The paper was bright orange, impossible to miss, and our neighbors definitely saw it. I stood on my own porch, the porch where I'd had my morning coffee for 27 years, where Marcus had learned to ride his bike, where Robert and I had kissed on our anniversary, and I couldn't make my hand reach for the doorknob. Mrs. Chen from next door was watching from her window. I could see her curtain twitch. By tomorrow, everyone on the block would know. Carol and Robert, losing their house. Poor Carol. She'd always been so proud of that garden. All those memories. Christmas mornings with wrapping paper scattered across the living room floor. The time we'd painted the kitchen together and gotten more paint on ourselves than the walls. The pencil marks on the doorframe tracking Marcus's height year by year. I was losing pieces of myself. Physical pieces. The eviction notice wasn't just about losing a house. It was about losing proof that my life had meant something. I thought about the first day we'd walked into this house. Marcus had been 5, small enough to ride on Robert's shoulders. The realtor had shown us through, talking about square footage and good bones, and I'd fallen in love with the garden, wild and overgrown, but full of potential. "I could make it beautiful," I'd said to Robert. "You make everything beautiful," he'd replied. And I'd believed him. 27 years of making it beautiful, of planting jasmine and roses, of laying flagstone paths, of building the life I dreamed of. And now some bank was going to take it because my husband couldn't stop gambling. That night, I slept in my car in a parking lot downtown. Not because we didn't have a hotel room, I'd found a cheap motel that would take cash, but because I couldn't stand to be near either of them. My phone buzzed with texts from Robert, from Marcus, apologies, explanations, promises that they'd fix it, that they'd find a way. The texts from Marcus were almost worse than Robert's. "Mom, please come home. We can work this out. Dad's sorry. I'm sorry. Please." As if sorry could fix this. As if sorry could give me back my savings, my home, my trust. I turned off my phone and watched the city lights through my windshield and felt absolutely nothing. The car became my sanctuary for those first few nights. I parked in different lots each evening. A Target parking lot one night, a 24-hour diner the next, always choosing places with some light, some sense of safety. I'd recline the seat back as far as it would go and try to sleep, but mostly I just stared at the ceiling and tried to process what my life had become. During the day, I went to work as usual. My co-workers at the community college had no idea anything was wrong. I showed up on time, answered emails, processed registration paperwork, smiled when appropriate. I became an expert at compartmentalization. The Carol at work was functional, pleasant, competent. The Carol sitting in her car at midnight eating cold French fries from a drive-thru was someone else entirely. I thought about checking into that motel, the one I'd found that would take cash. But something stopped me. Maybe it was stubbornness. Maybe it was the need to punish myself for being so blind. Or maybe, on some level, I needed to feel uncomfortable, needed the physical discomfort to match the emotional devastation. The car was cramped and cold and made my back ache, and that felt right somehow. Appropriate. On the third night, a security guard tapped on my window around 2 a.m. I'd been dozing, and the sudden knock jolted me awake, my heart pounding. "Ma'am, you can't sleep here," he said when I rolled down the window. He was young, maybe Marcus's age, with kind eyes that looked concerned. "I'm sorry. I'll move." Are you okay? Do you need me to call someone?" The genuine concern in his voice almost broke me. Here was this stranger, this kid working night security at a shopping center, showing me more compassion than my own family had. "I'm fine," I lied. "Just had a long day. I'll go home now." But I didn't have a home. Not really. Not anymore. That's when I finally called Jane. It was 3 a.m, and I sat in my car outside the shopping center with my phone in my shaking hands, trying to work up the courage to dial. We hadn't spoken regularly in years. What right did I have to call her in the middle of the night and dump my problems on her? But I had no one else. Tom was family, but he was also Robert's brother-in-law, and I couldn't face the questions, the family politics, the inevitable pressure to work it out. I needed someone outside of it all, someone who wouldn't judge me for falling apart. She answered on the third ring, her voice thick with sleep. "Carol, what's wrong?" "I'm sorry to call so late. I didn't know who else." "Where are you?" "I'm in a parking lot. I've been sleeping in my car. Robert and Marcus, Jane, they stole everything. Everything." "What's the address? I'm coming to get you." "No, you don't have to." "The address, Carol." I gave it to her. 20 minutes later, her headlights swept across my windshield. She got out of her car wearing pajama pants and a coat, her hair in a messy ponytail, and when she opened my car door and saw me sitting there with my suitcase in the back seat and my whole life in shambles, she didn't ask questions. She just held out her hand. "Come on," she said. "Let's go home." And I went. The truth came crashing down, fully and irrevocably, at my granddaughter's graduation party. Hannah had just finished high school, and we'd gathered at Marcus's apartment for a celebration. I'd been sleeping on Jane's couch for 2 weeks by then, my old friend from college who'd taken me in without questions when I'd shown up at her door with 2 suitcases and empty eyes. Jane had been an angel. She'd opened her door, taken one look at my face, and just pulled me inside. "Guest room is yours as long as you need it," she'd said. "We'll talk when you're ready." I'd cried then, finally, sobbing into her shoulder like a child. She'd held me and made soothing noises and didn't ask for explanations. Later, after I'd showered and changed into borrowed pajamas and we were sitting on her couch with wine, I'd told her everything. She'd listened without interrupting, and when I finished, she'd said, "We're going to fix this. I don't know how yet, but we are." I hadn't planned to go to the party, but Hannah had called me personally, her voice small and hopeful, and I couldn't say no to her. She hadn't done anything wrong. She was 18 and brilliant and about to start at Berkeley, and she deserved to have her grandmother there. "Please, Grandma," she'd said on the phone, "it won't be the same without you." So I'd gone, for her. The apartment was crowded. Extended family I hadn't seen in months, friends of Marcus's I didn't recognize. Someone had made a sheet cake with "Congratulations, Hannah" written in purple icing. I stood near the kitchen, holding a paper plate with a slice I had no intention of eating, and tried to smile. The apartment was nice. Nicer than I'd expected for someone who'd claimed to be struggling financially. Hardwood floors, modern appliances, a massive flat-screen TV. I wondered how much of my money had paid for it. Marcus was across the room, laughing with his cousins. My brother Tom was there with his wife Carol. Robert's sister Linda had flown in from Phoenix. Everyone was happy, celebratory, and I felt like I was watching it all from behind glass. Hannah found me in the kitchen. She looked beautiful in a blue dress, her hair done up in complicated braids. "Grandma, I'm so glad you came." I hugged her tight, this precious girl who'd done nothing to deserve any of this. "I wouldn't miss it, sweetheart. I'm so proud of you." "Are you okay? Dad said you and Grandpa were having some problems." "Don't worry about that. This is your day. Tell me about Berkeley. Have you decided on a major?" Then Marcus said it. He was telling some story, gesturing with his beer, and the words just slipped out. "Yeah, we had to use the loan from Mom to cover Dad's debts, but we got it sorted." The room didn't stop. The music kept playing, people kept talking, but I heard it. I stood there with my wine glass. Jane had insisted I needed something stronger than punch, and everything crystallized. Loan. He'd called it a loan. As if I'd agreed to it. As if it had been my choice. The blood rushed to my face. My hands went cold. Somewhere far away I could hear Hannah asking if I was okay, but I was already moving. I walked over to him mid-sentence. "What did you just say?" He blinked at me. "What?" "The loan. What loan?" The color drained from his face. Around us, conversations faltered. People were starting to notice. "Mom, not here." "No, right here." My voice was calm, eerily calm. "Tell everyone about the loan." Robert appeared beside Marcus, his hand on my elbow. "Honey, let's talk outside." I shook him off. "You took money from my accounts. You forged my signature. You covered your gambling debts with my retirement fund, and then you gave me $2,000 of my own money as a birthday present to throw me off the trail." The room had gone silent. Hannah was staring at me with wide eyes. Tom looked confused. Linda had her hand over her mouth. Marcus tried to laugh it off. "Mom, you're confused." "No." I set down my wine glass with deliberate care. "I'm not confused. For the first time in months, I'm seeing clearly." "You're making a scene," Robert hissed, his hand tightening on my arm. I looked down at his hand, then up at his face. "Let go of me. Carol, please, let go of me." He dropped his hand like I'd burned him. The room was silent except for the music still playing from someone's phone, some cheerful pop song that felt obscene given what was happening. Tom stepped forward. "Carol, what's going on? Ask your nephew. Ask him about the $80,000 he and his father stole from me." Marcus's face went white. "It wasn't stealing. We were going to pay you back." "When? With what money?" That night, after I left the party, after the shouting and the denials and Tom pulling me aside to ask if I was okay, I sat in Jane's bathroom and looked at myself in the mirror. Really looked. I saw a woman I didn't recognize. The wrinkles had always been there, the gray hair too. But there was something else now. Something in my eyes, a hollowness that hadn't been there before. The betrayal had carved itself into my face, into the set of my jaw, the tightness around my mouth. I'd aged a decade in 3 months. I touched my reflection, my fingertips leaving prints on the glass. This was what they'd done to me. This was the cost of their lies. The woman in the mirror looked tired, beaten down, defeated. I hated her. I hated what I'd let them turn me into. Jane found me there 20 minutes later. She didn't say anything, just sat down on the closed toilet lid and waited. "I can't believe I let this happen," I finally said. "You didn't let anything happen. They stole from you." But I should have seen it. The signs were all there. She shook her head. You trusted them. That's not a character flaw. That's being human. Being human got me robbed and homeless. Being human also means you can fight back. The question is, are you going to? I looked at her reflection in the mirror. Jane, my college roommate who I'd lost touch with after graduation. We'd reconnected on Facebook a few years back, exchanged pleasantries on birthdays, but we hadn't been close. Not like this. And yet she'd taken me in without hesitation, given me a place to heal, offered support without judgment. I don't know how to fight them, I admitted. They're my family. We're your family. Family doesn't steal from you. Over the next few weeks, Jane became my lifeline. We'd lost touch after college. Life had pulled us in different directions, but she'd heard about my situation through the complicated network of mutual acquaintances and had reached out immediately. She was the one who helped me think clearly when all I wanted to do was curl up and disappear. She made me breakfast every morning, insisted I eat even when I had no appetite. She sat with me while I went through bank statements, helped me organize evidence, didn't let me sink into despair. Listen, she said one morning over coffee. I know it's hard, but you can't let them get away with this. What am I supposed to do? Call the police on my own son? If that's what it takes. She pulled up articles on her laptop, statistics about financial abuse. Did you know that 1 in 3 seniors suffers some form of mistreatment? You're not alone in this. It's an epidemic, and it happens because people like Robert and Marcus count on you being too embarrassed or too loyal to fight back. I read the articles she showed me, stories of women just like me, families just like mine, adult children stealing from aging parents, spouses draining accounts and disappearing. The numbers were staggering. Billions of dollars, millions of victims. This one woman, Jane said, pointing to an article, her son stole over $200,000 from her. When she pressed charges, the family turned on her. Called her vindictive, said she was tearing the family apart. But you know what she said. They tore it apart when they stole from me. I'm just refusing to pretend it didn't happen. Something shifted in me then. She was right. I'd been so focused on my own shame, my own sense of failure, that I hadn't considered that this wasn't about me. This was about them, their choices, their cruelty. Jane helped me find a lawyer, a good one who specialized in elder financial abuse. The consultation was free, and when I laid out everything that had happened, she didn't look shocked. She looked tired. She'd seen this before, dozens of times. Her name was Margaret Chen, and she was in her 50s with steel gray hair and sharp eyes that didn't miss anything. Her office was small but efficient, walls lined with law books and diplomas. You have a strong case, she told me, but you need to be prepared for what comes next. This will get ugly. I thought about Marcus at 10 years old, gap-toothed and proud, showing me the Mother's Day card he'd made at school. I thought about Robert on our wedding day, young and handsome, promising to love and cherish me. I thought about every sacrifice I'd made for them, every dream I'd deferred, every piece of myself I'd given away. Let it get ugly, I said. Margaret smiled, a small, fierce smile. Good, because we're going to need that fire. The lawyer suggested I reach out to other family members who might have experienced similar treatment. I was resistant at first. Airing our dirty laundry felt wrong, felt like a betrayal of the family bonds I'd spent my life trying to maintain. But Jane reminded me that they'd betrayed those bonds first. I started with my cousin Patricia. She was older than me by 5 years, widowed, living alone in Santa Monica. When I told her what had happened, she went quiet. Carol, she finally said, my nephew did the same thing to me last year. What? He needed money for a business investment, asked to borrow $50,000. I gave it to him because he's family, because his mother, my sister, would have wanted me to help. He was supposed to pay me back in 6 months. Did he? A bitter laugh. I haven't seen a penny. And when I asked about it, he said I'd given it as a gift, not a loan. His wife backed him up. They had emails I'd supposedly sent saying it was a gift. I never sent those emails, Carol. The floodgates opened after that. I created a group chat, which felt absurdly modern for a woman my age, but Jane walked me through it, and slowly, carefully, other women joined. Patricia, Linda, Robert's sister, who confessed that her own son had stolen her jewelry and pawned it. Tom's wife Carol admitted that Tom had been borrowing from her mother's accounts for years. Linda's story was particularly heartbreaking. Her son had told her he needed money for his daughter's surgery. She'd given him her mother's pearl necklace, a family heirloom, to sell. Turned out there was no surgery. He'd sold it to pay gambling debts. I tried to buy it back, Linda said during one of our group calls. Found the pawn shop, but someone had already bought it. It's gone forever. We weren't just a family. We were a network of victims who'd been too ashamed to speak up. Jane sent me another article. Celebrities and wealthy people have lost millions to dishonest caregivers and family members, she said. This isn't about being smart or being stupid. It's about trust being weaponized against you. Our group started documenting everything. Receipts, bank statements, emails, text messages. We shared strategies. Patricia had successfully pressed charges against her nephew. Linda was in the process of changing her will. Carol was working with a financial advisor to secure her mother's assets. We met in person once, all of us gathering at Jane's apartment for what we jokingly called our survivors meeting. Seeing them all there, these strong women who'd been hurt by people they loved, made me realize I wasn't alone. We'd all trusted. We'd all been betrayed. And we were all fighting back. The support was overwhelming. For the first time since that day at the grocery store, I didn't feel alone. I felt like I was part of something bigger than my own pain. We were fighting back. Our group became more than just a support network. We started researching together, sharing articles and legal precedents. Patricia had a friend who was a forensic accountant, and he agreed to look at my case pro bono. He found discrepancies I'd missed, patterns of withdrawal that showed premeditation. This wasn't impulsive, he told me during our consultation. His reading glasses perched on his nose as he reviewed my statements. This was systematic. They planned this for months, maybe years. Look at these small withdrawals here. Testing amounts. They were seeing if you'd notice. He pointed to withdrawals from 8 months ago. $50 here, $100 there. Small enough that I'd chalked them up to miscalculations or things I'd forgotten I'd bought. They'd been testing my vigilance, seeing what they could get away with. Once they realized you weren't checking closely, the amounts increased. His finger traced a timeline across the statements. See? After 3 months of small withdrawals with no pushback from you, they got bolder. 500. 1,000. Then the big ones. I felt sick. This wasn't just theft. It was a calculated campaign. They'd studied me, learned my blind spots, exploited my trust with scientific precision. The forensic accountant's report became a cornerstone of my case. He documented everything in clinical, devastating detail. The progression of the theft, the forged signatures. The fake accounts opened in my name. The web of lies was so complex, so carefully constructed, that seeing it laid out in black and white made me realize I'd never stood a chance. They'd been playing chess while I didn't even know I was in a game. I spent weeks building my case. Every transaction, every forged signature, every lie documented and organized in a binder that grew thicker by the day. The lawyer was impressed. "This is the most thorough documentation I've seen," she said. "You've done half my job for me." I'd become obsessive about it, spending hours each day going through records, cross-referencing statements, building timelines. Jane would find me at the kitchen table at midnight, papers spread everywhere, my eyes red from staring at numbers. "You need to sleep," she'd say. "I need to make sure I don't miss anything." She'd make me tea, sit with me, help me organize. Between the two of us, we built an airtight case. Robert called constantly, left voicemails that cycled through anger, desperation, and pleading. Marcus texted apologies that felt hollow and rehearsed. I ignored them all. I was done being manipulated. One voicemail from Robert. "Carol, this is insane. I made a mistake, okay? I admit it. But you're going to destroy our family over money? Is that really what you want?" Another from Marcus. "Mom, Please, Hannah's devastated. You're ruining her graduation. Is that what you want to be remembered for? The guilt tactics were transparent, but they still stung. I'd been conditioned my whole life to put family first, to sacrifice myself, to keep everyone happy. Resisting that programming felt like swimming against a riptide. The confrontation I'd been building toward finally came at Christmas. I know, Christmas seems almost too perfectly dramatic, but that's when it happened. The family always gathered at Tom's house in Glendale. Turkey, presents, the whole production. I hadn't been planning to go, but the lawyer suggested it might be a good opportunity to address everyone at once. You need witnesses, Margaret had said, and you need them to understand you're serious. Do it publicly. Do it when they can't control the narrative. I arrived late, deliberately. The house was already full of relatives, warm and bright and smelling of cinnamon and roasted meat. Children ran through the living room. Adults clustered in the kitchen with drinks. It looked like every other Christmas we'd ever had. Tom saw me first. "Carol, we weren't sure you'd make it." I almost didn't. Robert and Marcus were in the den, watching football. When I walked in, they both stood up like guilty schoolboys caught smoking behind the gym. "Can we talk?" Robert started. "Actually, yes." I pulled the binder from my bag. "Everyone should hear this." Tom followed us into the living room, then Linda, then Carol. The party gradually fell silent as people sensed the shift in atmosphere. Someone turned off the television. The children were ushered into the backyard. I stood in front of the Christmas tree, white lights and red ornaments, the angel on top slightly crooked, and I laid it all out. Every theft, every forged signature, every lie. I had receipts, I had documentation, I had evidence that would hold up in court. Marcus tried to interrupt. "Mom, you don't understand." "I understand perfectly." My hands were steady, my voice was clear. "You stole from me, both of you. You treated me like an ATM instead of a person. You gave me my own money as a gift and expected me to be grateful." Robert's face was pale. "We were going to pay you back." "With what? More of my money?" The room was silent except for the ticking of Tom's grandfather clock. Hannah was crying quietly in the corner. Linda looked furious. Tom just looked sad. I turned to address the room. "How many of you knew? How many of you watched this happen and said nothing?" Tom shifted uncomfortably. "Carol, we didn't know the extent of it. But you knew something. You all knew something was wrong, and nobody said a word to me." Linda spoke up. "I suspected Robert was gambling again. I should have told you. I'm sorry." "Again?" I turned to her. "Again?" "He had a problem years ago before you got married. The family helped him get treatment. I thought. I hoped it was under control." This was news to me. 34 years of marriage, and I was just learning my husband had a gambling addiction that predated our relationship. How many other secrets were buried in this family? "I'm pressing charges," I continued, "against both of them, for fraud, for forgery, for financial abuse. My lawyer says I have a strong case." Marcus stepped forward. "Mom, please, it'll ruin us." "You ruined yourselves." The fallout was swift and brutal. Tom cut off contact with Robert immediately. Linda withdrew her offer to help with Marcus's new business venture. Carol called everyone in the extended family to make sure they knew what had happened. The gossip network that had once protected Robert and Marcus now turned against them with vicious efficiency. Within a week, Marcus had lost his job. Turns out his employer didn't appreciate having a thief on staff. Robert's few remaining friends stopped returning his calls. They'd counted on my silence, on my loyalty, on my shame. They hadn't counted on me fighting back. The legal process took months. Court dates, depositions, mountains of paperwork. My lawyer was relentless. She painted a picture of systematic abuse, of two men who'd exploited my trust for their own gain. The judge was a woman in her 60s who looked at me with something like recognition in her eyes. The first court appearance was terrifying. I'd never been in a courtroom before. Never imagined I'd be sitting across from my own family in a legal battle. The courtroom was smaller than I'd expected, wood-paneled and formal, with fluorescent lights that made everyone look slightly jaundiced. Robert sat at the defendant's table with his lawyer, a sharp-dressed man who'd probably cost more than we could afford. Or more accurately, more than I could afford, since Robert was still spending money he didn't have. Marcus sat beside him, both of them in suits that looked new. More money wasted on appearances. I tried not to look at them, but it was impossible. This was the man I'd woken up next to for 34 years. The man who'd held my hand when Marcus was born, who'd cried at our wedding, who'd promised to love and cherish me until death do us part. And there he sat, across a courtroom, his lawyer whispering strategies on how to keep my own money from me. Marcus caught my eye once. He looked like he wanted to say something, his mouth opening slightly, but his lawyer put a hand on his arm and he looked away. That small gesture, that almost apology that never materialized, hurt more than anything else. He couldn't even look me in the eye. The depositions were brutal. Sitting across from Marcus while lawyers questioned him about every lie he'd told, watching him squirm and deflect and finally break down crying. We were in a small conference room, just me, Marcus, the lawyers, and a court reporter whose fingers flew across her stenography machine with mechanical precision. "Mr. Bennett," Margaret began, her voice professional and cold, "when did you first become aware of your father's gambling problem?" Marcus shifted in his seat. I'm not sure exactly. Approximately. Maybe 6 months ago. A year? Margaret slid a document across the table. "This is an email you sent to your father dated 18 months ago. In it, you discuss covering up certain transactions from your mother. Would you like me to read it aloud?" I watched the color drain from Marcus's face. I'd read that email. It was casual, almost joking in tone. "Don't worry about Mom," he'd written. "I'll keep her distracted," as if I were a child who needed to be managed rather than a person who deserved the truth. The deposition went on for hours, every lie dissected, every manipulation exposed. At one point, Marcus broke down crying, insisting he'd never meant to hurt me, that he was just trying to help his father. "By stealing from your mother?" Margaret asked, her tone sharp. "It wasn't stealing. It was a loan. We were going to pay it back." "With what funds?" Silence. Robert's deposition was worse. He was angry, defensive, tried to paint me as a vindictive wife who couldn't accept that he'd made mistakes. "Your Honor," his lawyer said during one hearing, "my client acknowledges that mistakes were made, but this was a family matter that should have been resolved privately. Mrs. Bennett's decision to pursue legal action is tearing apart a family that could have been repaired through communication and counseling." I wanted to scream. Tearing apart the family? They'd done that when they chose money over honesty, when they chose to steal rather than ask for help, when they gave me my own money as a birthday present and expected me to be grateful. "Mistakes," Margaret had said, her voice sharp. "You systematically defrauded your wife over a period of 2 years. That's not a mistake, that's a crime." She presented the forensic accountant's report, the timeline of theft, the forged signatures, the fake accounts. Each piece of evidence was a hammer blow, and I watched Robert's confidence crumble with each revelation. At one point, the judge interrupted. "Mr. Bennett, did you or did you not open a Wells Fargo account in your wife's name without her knowledge or consent?" Robert hesitated. His lawyer whispered something to him. "Answer the question, Mr. Bennett." Yes, Your Honor. But I was planning to close it before she found out. It was temporary." "And the money withdrawn from this account, where did it go?" Another pause. "To cover debts." "Gambling debts?" "Yes, Your Honor." The judge wrote something down, her expression unreadable. I felt a small spark of something that might have been hope. She saw through them. She understood. Robert tried to plead down. Marcus tried to claim he'd been manipulated by his father. Neither strategy worked. The final judgment came down in April. Restitution for every dollar they'd stolen. court-ordered monitoring of their finances, a restraining order preventing them from contacting me without my explicit permission. Marcus was ordered to complete community service. Robert faced probation and mandatory counseling. They'd lost everything: their reputations, their relationships, their freedom to control their own money. They'd bet on me staying quiet, and they'd lost. I felt nothing when the judge read the verdict. No satisfaction, no triumph. Just a vast, echoing emptiness where my family used to be. After everything, I decided to start fresh. Los Angeles held too many memories, too many ghosts. Jane suggested Portland. She had a friend with a rental property that was affordable and quiet. I'd never been to the Pacific Northwest, but the idea of somewhere new, somewhere without history, felt like exactly what I needed. The apartment was small, third floor of an old building in the Pearl District, hardwood floors and big windows that let in watery light. I brought almost nothing with me, just clothes, books, a few photographs from before everything fell apart. I wanted to travel light, to prove to myself that I could exist without the weight of all that history. Moving day was strange. I packed my entire life into 2 suitcases and 3 boxes. 34 years of marriage reduced to so little. But it felt liberating, too. Each item I left behind was a piece of the old Carol, the woman who'd let herself be victimized. I was becoming someone new. My first morning there, I woke up to the sound of rain. Not the aggressive downpours I was used to in LA, but soft and steady, like the city was breathing. I made coffee in my new kitchen, which was tiny but mine, and sat by the window watching people hurry past with umbrellas. For the first time in over a year, I felt something like peace. I got a job at a bookstore downtown. It didn't pay much, but I didn't need much. My needs had simplified. I worked the morning shift, helped customers find books, restocked shelves. My co-workers were mostly young people who didn't know anything about my past, who saw me as just Carol, the older woman who knew an unsettling amount about mystery novels. The bookstore was called Powell's, and it was massive, an entire city block of books. My manager, a woman named Sarah in her 30s with purple hair and sleeve tattoos, was patient as I learned the computerized inventory system. "You're a natural," she said after my first week. "Customer service is all about empathy, and you've got that in spades." If only she knew. All that empathy had nearly destroyed me. I started going to a support group for victims of financial abuse, met in the basement of a community center every Thursday evening. The first time I walked in, I almost turned around and left. Admitting I needed help felt like admitting defeat. But the facilitator, a woman named Ruth, who'd lost everything to a scammer posing as a romantic partner, welcomed me with such genuine warmth that I stayed. I told my story. Not the sanitized version. Not the version that made me look less foolish, but the truth. The whole ugly truth. And when I finished, nobody looked at me with pity. They just nodded. They understood. One evening, about 6 months after I'd moved, I was walking home from the bookstore when I passed an art gallery. There was a show opening, people milling around with wine glasses, and through the window, I could see paintings. Bright, abstract splashes of color that seemed to pulse with life. I went in. I hadn't meant to. I was wearing my work clothes, jeans, and a sweater, completely underdressed for the well-heeled crowd. But nobody seemed to notice or care. I wandered through the gallery, looking at paintings that didn't try to be anything other than what they were. One piece stopped me. It was mostly blue, deep ocean blue that seemed to go on forever. But there, in the corner, was a slash of gold. Sunrise, or hope, or just light breaking through. "It's called After," a voice said beside me. I turned. The artist was younger than me, maybe 40, with paint-stained hands and an earnest expression. "After what?" I asked. She shrugged. "That's for you to decide." I bought it. It cost more than I should have spent, but I bought it anyway. Had it hung in my living room where I could see it every morning. A reminder that after everything, after the betrayal and the loss and the pain, there could still be beauty. I started painting myself after that. Nothing serious, just watercolors at the kitchen table on Sunday mornings. I was terrible at it. My flowers looked like blobs, and my landscapes were hopelessly disproportionate. But it didn't matter. I wasn't trying to be good. I was trying to create something that was mine alone. The act of painting became meditative. I'd set up my supplies, cheap watercolors from the art store, student-grade paper, brushes that shed bristles, and I'd just let myself play. No expectations. No pressure to create something beautiful or meaningful. Just color and water and the simple pleasure of watching pigment bloom across wet paper. Sometimes I'd paint for hours, losing track of time entirely. The light would shift from morning gold to afternoon silver, and I'd look up from my work to find the day nearly gone. Those were the good days. When my mind went quiet and there was nothing but the brush in my hand and the paper in front of me. Other times I'd sit down with every intention of painting and just stare at the blank page, paralyzed by memories. I'd think about Robert, about Marcus, about the life I'd lost. The paper would stay white, the paints untouched, and eventually I'd put everything away and make tea instead. But I kept showing up. Every Sunday morning, I'd set up my supplies. Some days I painted, some days I didn't. The important thing was the ritual, the commitment to myself that I was worth this time, this space, this small creative act. Sarah from the bookstore noticed the paint under my fingernails one day and asked about it. When I told her I'd started painting, her whole face lit up. No way. I paint too. Mostly abstracts. You should come to this life drawing class I go to on Tuesday nights. It's at the community center, super casual, all skill levels welcome. I almost said no. The idea of drawing nude models with a room full of strangers felt impossibly vulnerable. But something made me hesitate. Think about it, Sarah said. No pressure, but it's really fun. And the instructor is amazing. Plus, there's wine. I went. The following Tuesday, I showed up at the community center with my cheap supplies and my nervousness, and I drew terrible, wonky figures while sipping mediocre wine and trying not to compare my work to the person next to me. It was wonderful. The instructor, a woman named Diane with wild curly hair and paint-stained overalls, came around during the session to offer gentle guidance. When she got to my easel, she studied my drawing for a long moment. "You're being too careful," she said. "Let yourself make mistakes. That's where the interesting stuff happens." Let yourself make mistakes. What a concept. I'd spent my whole life trying to be perfect, trying to hold everything together, trying to be the good wife, the good mother, the good woman who never complained and always forgave. Where had that gotten me? I picked up a piece of charcoal and drew a bold, messy line across the page. It was wrong, anatomically incorrect, but it had energy. It had life. Diane grinned. "There you go." I started going every Tuesday. The class became another ritual, another piece of my new life. Some weeks I drew well. Some weeks I didn't, but I showed up. I met people, other artists, hobbyists, retirees looking for community. We'd go out for drinks after class sometimes, talking about art and life and everything in between. One woman, Catherine, was going through a divorce after 30 years of marriage. Another, Miguel, had lost his partner to cancer and was trying to find himself again. We were all rebuilding, all trying to create something new from the wreckage of what came before. Jane visited that fall. She flew up for a long weekend, and we spent it exploring the city like tourists. Powell's bookstore, the Japanese gardens, food carts in the rain. She looked at me over Vietnamese coffee one afternoon and said, "You look different." Different how? Lighter, like you're not carrying the world anymore. Maybe she was right. I'd spent so much of my life weighted down by obligation, by the need to hold everything together, by the belief that my worth was measured in what I could give others. Now I was just me. Carol. Not someone's wife or mother or victim. Just a woman trying to figure out what came next. I didn't hear from Robert or Marcus. The restraining order made sure of that. Sometimes I wondered if they thought about me, if they felt any genuine remorse. Mostly I tried not to think about them at all. Hannah reached out once, about a year after everything happened. A careful email asking if we could talk. I thought about it for a week before responding. We met for coffee in a neutral location, a cafe halfway between Portland and Berkeley, where she was in school. The drive down was long, giving me hours to think about what I'd say, how I'd act. I was nervous in a way I hadn't been in months. Hannah represented the one remaining thread connecting me to my old life, and I was terrified of either pulling it tighter or cutting it completely. The cafe was one of those trendy places college students love. Mismatched furniture, local art on the walls, a chalkboard menu listing drinks I'd never heard of. I arrived early and ordered something called a cortado, which turned out to be just a very small latte. I sat by the window, watching people pass by, my heart racing every time someone young and female approached. Then I saw her, walking down the street with her backpack slung over one shoulder, her hair pulled back in a ponytail. She looked so much like Marcus it hurt. Same dark eyes, same quick smile. But she wasn't him. She'd been a child when it all fell apart, caught in the crossfire. She spotted me through the window and waved, and for a moment, she looked exactly like the little girl who used to run to me at family gatherings, arms outstretched, yelling, "Grandma!" Now she was 18, on the cusp of adulthood, and the distance between us felt vast. "Grandma," she said when she came in, and then hesitated, like she wasn't sure if she was allowed to hug me. I stood up and pulled her into my arms. She felt so small, so fragile, and when she hugged me back, I felt tears sting my eyes. We sat down, both of us nervous, both of us trying to figure out how to navigate this conversation. Hannah ordered something complicated with oat milk, and we made small talk about the weather, about Portland, about anything except the elephant in the room. Finally, she took a breath and said, "I'm sorry for what they did to you. You didn't do anything wrong." "I know, but they're still my dad and grandfather, and I wanted you to know I don't think it was okay. What they did." Her hands were wrapped around her cup, knuckles white. "I didn't know. About the gambling, about the money. I mean, I knew something was wrong, but I didn't know the extent of it until everything came out. I believe you. Do you?" She looked up at me, her eyes searching mine. "Because I keep thinking, maybe I should have known. Maybe I should have asked more questions or paid more attention or something." I reached across the table and took her hand. "Hannah, you were a kid. You're still a kid. This isn't your responsibility. I'm 18. I'm an adult. Legally, maybe. But you shouldn't have been put in this position. None of this is your fault." She nodded, blinking back tears. "I miss you. I miss how things used to be." "I miss that too." We talked for 2 hours about her classes, her friends, her dreams of becoming an environmental lawyer. She told me about her roommate who never did dishes, about the professor whose lectures put everyone to sleep, about the protest she'd organized against the university's investment in fossil fuels. She was smart and passionate and so full of life, and I was so proud of her. She didn't ask me to forgive Marcus and Robert, didn't try to play mediator or rebuild bridges that had burned to ash. She just wanted me to know she still loved me, and that she understood why I'd done what I'd done. "Dad lost his job," she said at one point, her voice quiet. I heard. "He's struggling. They both are." She looked at me carefully, like she was testing the waters. "I'm not saying that to make you feel bad. I just thought you should know." "I appreciate that. But Hannah, they made their choices. I made mine. What happened to them is a consequence of their actions, not mine. I know. I'm not asking you to do anything. She trailed off, struggling for words. I love them. Even though what they did was awful, they're still my family. But I love you too, and I hate that I have to choose. You don't have to choose. You can love all of us and still acknowledge that what happened was wrong. When we said goodbye, I hugged her tight. She was the one good thing that had come from that family, the one pure relationship that hadn't been poisoned by greed and lies. As I watched her walk back toward campus, backpack bouncing against her back, I felt a bittersweet mixture of loss and hope. I'd lost so much, but this connection with Hannah might survive. And that was something. Before I end my story, I want to share something important I learned through all of this. Something I wish I'd understood 30 years ago when I was making choices that would shape the rest of my life. Understanding why victims stay in abusive situations isn't just academic. It's critical. And I'm not just talking about physical abuse, financial abuse, emotional manipulation. These create chains just as strong as any physical restraint. People who've never experienced it always ask the same question. Why didn't you just leave? As if it's that simple. As if you can just walk away from decades of your life, from people you love, from the version of yourself you've built around those relationships. There's a cycle to abuse that most people don't understand. It starts with idealization, the honeymoon phase where everything seems perfect. Then comes devaluation, where little criticisms start, where you're made to feel like you're never quite good enough. Finally, discard, where you're either literally abandoned or emotionally discarded while still physically present. But here's the insidious part. After discard often comes hoovering. They suck you back in with apologies, with promises to change, with glimpses of that person you fell in love with. And the cycle starts again. I stayed because I'd invested so much. 34 years of marriage, raising a child, building a life. Walking away felt like admitting all of that had been for nothing. I stayed because I believed in forgiveness, in second chances, in the idea that family was forever. I stayed because leaving meant admitting I'd been wrong about the people I loved most. Financial dependence kept me trapped too. Robert had slowly, systematically taken control of our finances. He knew what we had, where it was, how to access it. I knew my salary, and not much else. That's a common tactic. Abusers isolate you financially so you can't imagine surviving without them. There's also something called trauma bonding. When you've been through stress and fear with someone, your brain creates powerful attachment bonds, even when they're the source of that stress. It's why hostages sometimes develop sympathy for their captors. It's why abuse victims defend their abusers. Your brain is trying to survive by creating connection with the person causing you pain. And the shame. God, the shame is paralyzing. Admitting you've been abused means admitting you were fooled, that you were weak, that you didn't see what should have been obvious. In a society that values independence and strength, especially for women of my generation who fought so hard for autonomy, admitting vulnerability feels like failure. I want you to understand something. If you're in a situation like I was, if you're reading this and seeing yourself in my story, please know that staying doesn't make you stupid. It makes you human. Our brains are wired for connection, for loyalty, for hope. Abusers exploit those beautiful human qualities. But here's what I learned. You can leave. It won't be easy. It will be one of the hardest things you ever do. You'll doubt yourself. You'll question whether you're overreacting. You'll miss them, even as you're healing from what they did to you. Create a safety plan. Document everything. Texts, emails, bank statements, anything that proves the abuse. Tell someone you trust what's happening, just one person. Break the isolation. Contact local resources. Most cities have organizations that help abuse victims, and not just for physical abuse. Financial abuse is real and it's common, and there are people who can help. If you can, set aside money they don't know about. Open a bank account at a different institution. Start gathering important documents, birth certificates, social security cards, anything you'll need to start over. Do it slowly if you have to. Do it scared, but do it. And when you finally leave, when you finally break free, understand that healing isn't linear. You'll have good days and bad days. You'll grieve the life you thought you had. You'll be angry and sad and relieved all at once. That's normal. That's part of the process. Find support, whether it's a therapist, a support group, or just one good friend who believes you. Talk about it. Don't let the shame fester in silence. Shame dies when it's exposed to light. Know that you deserve better. You deserve relationships built on respect and honesty. You deserve to feel safe. You deserve to control your own money, your own choices, your own life. These aren't luxuries. They're basic human rights. And if you're someone who knows a victim, who suspects someone you care about is being abused, please don't judge them for staying. Instead, offer support without conditions. Let them know you're there when they're ready. Don't push them to leave before they're ready. That can be dangerous. Just be a steady presence, a reminder that there's life outside the abuse. One more thing. In Mexico and many other countries, studies indicate that 1 in 3 seniors suffers some form of mistreatment. In the United States, the numbers are similar. This isn't rare. This isn't a personal failing. This is a widespread epidemic that thrives in silence. We need to talk about it more openly. We need to recognize the signs. We need to create systems that protect vulnerable people instead of leaving them to fend for themselves. We need to believe victims when they come forward instead of asking why they stayed so long. My story ended with escape and rebuilding. Not everyone's does. Some people don't make it out. Some people stay until it kills them, literally or figuratively. I was lucky. I had Jane. I had resources. I had just enough strength left to fight. If you're in a similar situation, please reach out, call a hotline, talk to a lawyer, tell someone what's happening. You don't have to have all the answers. You don't have to have a perfect plan. You just have to take one small step toward freedom. Thank you for staying with me until the end, for listening to my story, for not judging me for the mistakes I made or the time it took me to leave. For understanding that abuse is complicated, and leaving is complicated, and healing is complicated. I'd love to know where you're listening from and what time it is where you are. Drop a comment and let me know. And if this story resonated with you, if you saw yourself or someone you love in my experience, please hit that like button. It helps more people find these stories, and maybe it helps someone who needs to hear that they're not alone. What would you have done in my place? I'm genuinely curious. Would you have pressed charges? Would you have tried to forgive? Would you have left sooner? There's no right answer, but I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. If you found value in this story, please subscribe to the channel. We share real-life experiences like this one, stories of survival, of courage, of ordinary people facing extraordinary challenges. Sometimes the stories have happy endings. Sometimes they don't. But they're always real, and they're always told with honesty. Before you go, I want to recommend 2 other videos you might find helpful. There's one about recognizing financial abuse red flags early. I wish I'd watched something like that 30 years ago. And another about rebuilding your credit and finances after financial abuse. Both have helped people in our community, and they might help you too. Until the next story, take care of your heart. Protect it fiercely. Don't let anyone convince you that love means accepting mistreatment. Real love lifts you up. Real love respects you. Real love doesn't empty your bank account and lie about it. You deserve real love. Don't settle for anything less.